Does the geological column exist or not? We're going to investigate this question on this episode of Genesis Week. Welcome to this episode of Genesis Week, the weekly program of creationary commentary on news, views, and events pertaining to the Origins controversy, made possible by the supporters of CORE Ottawa, Citizens for Origins Research and Education, and now carried on the Christianema Network. Christianema.com, Christian cinema at its finest. Excellence in pirate broadcasting, we bring you the information the anti-creationists don't want you to see or hear, and giving glory to our Creator while doing it. Remember, if you get lost in cyberspace, you can just punch in Wazooloo.com or GenesisWeek.com and you can find us. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel to get extras like Crevo rants and full interviews with our guests. I'm your host, Ian Juby. Some fascinating papers came out in the journal Geology the past couple of issues. The first one came out in March issue, adding to what has been a continual work in progress, constructing and refining the geologic column. Now, you've all seen pictures of the fictitious geologic column. Usually you see it in schools and museums because that really is the only place they exist. Now, allegedly, older rocks on the bottom, with the rocks getting younger and younger as you go higher in the column. Well, this most recent refinement, I love this, the Geological Society of America has claimed to be able to date parts of the time scale with precisions approaching 0.05%. Boy, that's pretty precise! And you better believe all those ages are vastly larger than the biblical age of the Earth. Well, if so many scientists can be so precise that the age of that rock is 3 billion years old and not 6,000 years old, well, the Bible just must be wrong, right? I mean, how could so many scientists be so wrong? Well, let's put the claims of these scientists to the test with a little bit of investigation, shall we? Now, when I say the geologic column does not exist except in textbooks and museum displays, I ain't kidding. First of all, most places you find would be like Grand Canyon. There are huge gaps of time in the rock record. Or is it actually that it's not the evidence of time that's mysteriously gone missing, but actually the time itself is missing? For instance, Dr. Derek Ager, a very outspoken anti-creationist and world-famous geologist, referred to Grand Canyon as surely the finest record of geological history anywhere on Earth, which had huge breaks of time. Now, indeed, this model at the Big Valley Creation Science Museum in Alberta, Canada, shows where these alleged gaps of time are. Now remember, neither I nor the Big Valley Creation Science Museum believes these ages. We're just repeating the ages the evolutionary geologists have claimed are missing. 480 million years absent between the basement and Precambrian left no evidence behind. A combined 313 million years of assumed geological time within and between the Unkar, Nankoweap, and Chuar formations, and somehow it came and left without leaving a trace. While the supergroup was supposed to have sat there for some 215 million years, during which time it was tilted, it was then cut by the Tapete Sandstone. That 215 million years left not a shred of evidence. Right here, it's expected there was 155 million years of deposition of dirt, which somehow all vanished without any trace of erosion. The remains of the Surprise Canyon Formation are supposed to represent 25 million years, again alleged to have eroded away, while leaving behind no evidence. The top layer of Grand Canyon is claimed to be 270 million years old, and tourists now walk around on this layer. 270 million years of geological deposits have been washed away. Now, if we ignore the Temple Butte and Surprise Canyon formations, we have a total of 1,295,000,000 years of alleged geological time that has gone missing. This all adds up to a staggering 81% of the geologic column, which is absent without a trace, in what was described as surely the finest record of geological history anywhere on Earth. Now, as you study geology, you will find this situation is the rule, not the exception. But it gets better than that. It would be assumed, simple logic, that the lower layers must be laid down first in order for a layer to be laid down on top of it, right? And so therefore, technically the lower layer is older than the upper layers. But now we introduce the dating methods used by the evolutionary geologists to assign ages to the rock layers. Ages based upon evolutionary theory. They use fossils primarily to date the rocks, but sometimes those radio dating methods are used that we've discussed at great length, in which I cover in Crevo Rant number 100, dating methods. So when we take the evolutionary ages assigned to the rocks, we notice some unusual situations. At the entrance to Banff National Park in Canada, the first prominent mountain you see is Yamnuska. Now, there's a very unusual feature about Yamnuska. Those 1,000-foot sheer cliff faces are made of limestone, which is assigned an evolutionary age of 520 million years old. But it's sitting on top of shale, which is given an evolutionary age of 75 million years old. Whoops! Obviously, this is a problem. Unless there was some bizarre experiment gone wrong which transported an entire mountain into the future and set it down on top of younger rocks. So the evolutionary geologists tried to explain this away with what is called a thrust fault. They claim that during the formation of the Rocky Mountains, the 1,000-foot thick layer of limestone slid up and over top of the younger shales. All right, fair enough. One must certainly consider all possibilities. Now, a hypothesis has been presented. Let's now put it to the test and make some predictions, shall we? If you take your hand and press down hard on, say, a table, and force your hand across the table, your hand gets warm from the friction. Just that little bit of weight and pressure produces heat that you can physically feel. Now envision sliding 1,000 vertical feet of rock across the top of another rock. What is going to happen? Well, the physics are actually quite easy to calculate. There will be so much heat produced, it will literally melt the rock. Another feature you would see from the rocks sliding over top of one another is the actual balling and rolling of the rocks, leaving myelinite, which looks like this. Yamnuska Mountain was only one of 7 different thrust faults that I had the privilege to study over the past few years. Now, it's a brutal hike, but you can go up that mountain and take a look for yourself. Now, here we are getting up to what we call the contact, where the limestone and the shale meet. Now, as we get right at the contact, we see no evidence that the rock is even discolored from heat, let alone melted. There is no myelinite visible. Now, some suggest that perhaps the rock could have slid very slowly over top the others, so as to not produce heat. But that doesn't work. This is basic physics. Have you ever pushed something heavy across the floor? Getting it started is the hard part. Keeping it moving is quite a bit easier. The reason for this is because static or standing friction is greater than the friction of movement. In other words, it takes more force to start something moving from a standstill than it does to keep it moving. So if we apply this principle to our 1,000-foot thick slab of rock, if there was some kind of force that was pushing on the rock enough to start it moving, then that same force would suddenly move the rock in jumps, because once it starts moving, it has an excess of force to move the rock. You cannot move the rock slowly, plain and simple. But when rock slides across another rock, it leaves scratches, which geologists call slickensides. Now, if you look closely at this picture of a polystrate fossil tree in Tennessee, what is hard to see is that the tree is actually bent over in the rocks at this overhang. But obviously the rocks did not slide very far relative to each other. I mean, there's a fossil tree connecting the layers. Yet, though they are hard to see in this photo, slickensides were made from that little bit of movement. Now let's take a look at the overhang at the contact of the Amnuska Mountain. Notice no slickensides. In fact, there was some minor interbedding of the shales and limestone, indicating they were formed at the same time. Are we to believe that a 1,000-foot thick layer of rock slid several kilometers over top the other one without even so much as scratching the rocks? Or is it more likely the ages given to the rocks are arbitrary fiction? And the thrust fault story is just that, an ad hoc story that does not fit the facts. But it gets better. This is Castle Mountain in Banff, another fine example of an alleged thrust fault, and an even more brutal climb if you want to go do this. Again, it is limestone resting on top of shales. The limestone cliffs jut up some 2,000 feet and are alleged to be some 600 million years old, while the shale they sit on is a mere 200 million years old. Now, taking a hike up there and getting to the contact, it is actually difficult to discern where the two rocks meet. That's how knife-edge the contact is. No evidence of melting or even heating of the rock. No myelinite. So are we expected to believe that 2,000 feet of solid rock was shoved up several kilometers over top the other with no evidence whatsoever that this happened? Such an event would most definitely have melted the rock. But let's head down to Waterton Lakes National Park in Canada, which joins onto Glacier National Park in the US. Now here we see another alleged thrust fault called the Lewis thrust. And the ages assigned to the rocks, it depends on who you ask, but typically it's described as 1.1 billion year old rocks resting on top of allegedly 100 million year old rocks. Now while I went there personally to examine the contact, you'll notice that not only are there no slickensides or evidence of extreme heating, the rocks themselves of the Waterton side are folded in unison, even with minor interbedding and interfingering between the layers. There is no myelinite here. In fact, the pro-evolution anti-creation website, Talk Origins, even inadvertently admits that the slickensides are absent by saying that some of the rocks have slickensides. Well, yes, undoubtedly there are slickensides in some areas, though I saw none where Vance Nelson and I studied. But that just indicates a very localized movement from all the mountain folding and whatnot. All of the contacts should have prominent slickensides, extreme heating and even melting of the rocks, and myelinite. Had they actually slid across each other for the 100 kilometers or so that is suggested? Now look, I'm certainly open to the idea of a thrust fault, but I want to see the evidence of such a sliding event. Of the 7 thrust faults I have had the privilege of studying, only one sorta kinda had evidence that may be interpreted as sliding. And yet other areas of the same fault showed zero evidence of sliding. Now, what we have here are layers that are out of sequence, evolutionarily speaking. There are hundreds of these in North America alone. I've only studied 7 thus far. If only one was a genuine reversal, it would invalidate the geologic column and, ultimately, evolutionary theory. So far, out of 7, I've determined at least 6 of them are genuine, out-of-sequence layers, with no evidence of thrust faulting. And that lack of evidence has been noted even in the secular literature. These are not thrust faults. They are invalidations of the fictitious geologic column and deep time. I know I shouldn't be, but once again I was kind of astonished at the angry and insulting accusations hurled at myself and fellow creationists on the Genesis Week Facebook page the past week. Nothing that a good permanent ban didn't fix, but once again I am taken aback by the number of people who were hurling insults surrounding the flat earth. Not that I'm astonished that these people think I believe in a flat earth, as there is a reason that the flat earth myth made it to the #1 spot of historical myths compiled by the Historical Society of London. But I was amazed that once again these atheists, even when I corrected their ignorance and showed them my Crevo rant number 271 from years ago, instead of just conceding that they'd made a mistake, instead insisted on being more aggressive in their stance on this lie and hurling more insults. Now, seeing as how the subject of the flat earth has come up so many times on the Genesis Week Facebook page in particular, I thought we would take a trip down memory lane and revisit the flat earth myth with Crevo rant number 271.
Whenever you read the comments on YouTube or various letters to the editor in reference to those annoying creationists, and even sometimes in live creation evolution debates, you'll notice a curious consistency that comes out of the atheists and anti-creationists. First, they will treat anybody who dares to question the evolution myth as though that person has the IQ of a stick. They will then follow it up promptly with a series of questions specifically designed to be as condescending and insulting as possible. Questions which, ironically, have the IQ of a stick. You know, questions like, oh, are you going to question gravity now? Or, oh, do you also think the Earth is flat? You know, questions that have absolutely nothing to do with creation and evolution. One might wonder why they're asking questions that have absolutely nothing to do with creation or evolution. Do I detect a distraction here? I wish I had $1 for every time some atheist asked me if I thought the Earth was flat. I'd have my museum paid off by now. I don't believe the Earth is flat. In fact, I don't know of any self-respecting Christian or creationist who thinks the Earth is flat. But how many of you were taught in school that Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in order to prove that the Earth was actually round and not flat? He wanted to show up the clergy in the church of his day and prove them wrong because they insisted that the Earth was flat. In fact, the clergy in the church of the day had his crew so scared they were afraid that if they sailed too far, they would sail off the edge of the Earth. How many of you remember that story from school? Well, guess what? That story is complete and utter rubbish. Fiction. An urban legend. Mythology. This flat earth myth made it to #1 spot in the top 10 list of historical myths as acknowledged by the Historical Society of Britain. In fact, with the exception of a few fringe believers in both the church and the secular world, everybody in Columbus's day knew that the Earth was a sphere. In fact, the Bible states in Isaiah chapter 40 verse 22 that the Earth is actually round. So where then did this story of Christopher Columbus and the flat Earth originate from? Actually, it originated from atheists and anti-creationists who were trying to attribute the story to Christians and creationists in order to slander them and make them look bad. This is all well documented in historian Jeffrey Burton Russell's book, Inventing the Flat Earth. Russell summed up his book in his scathing commentary at the American Scientific Affiliation Conference. The reason for promoting both the specific lie about the sphericity of the Earth and the general lie that religion and science are in natural and eternal conflict in Western society is to defend Darwinism. The flat Earth lie was ammunition against the creationists. The argument was simple and powerful, if not elegant. Look how stupid those creationists are. They are always getting in the way of science and progress. These people who deny evolution today are exactly the same sort of people as those idiots who for at least 1,000 years denied that the Earth was round. How stupid can you get? And he closes with the statement, but that is not truth. The story of Columbus and the flat Earth was first propagated in 1830 by two anti-church authors, Antoine Jean Latronne and his American contemporary Washington Irving. Wait a minute, 1830? You mean this lie has been propagated for 180 years? And yet still, even today, the atheists and anti-creationists are taking this lie that they concocted and hurling it at Christians and creationists. But should we really be that surprised that this lie is still being propagated and foisted upon us 180 years later? Certainly not. This is most certainly not the only myth that is being foisted on us in our evolutionary indoctrination our schools. Anybody remember the name Ernst Haeckel? Good old Ernst. First published his theory of recapitulation with a fraudulent drawing in 1868. Within months, his drawing was shown to be fraudulent. Yet, that same drawing still appears in our high school and university textbooks today, 140 years later. 140 years after being shown to be completely fraud. But like the evolution myth, the flat earth theory can be tested and falsified. I'm here at Brimstone Head, Fogo Island, Newfoundland, acknowledged by the Flat Earth Society as one of the four corners of the flat earth. Definitely a drop-off, but it ain't the edge of the earth. No edge of the earth here. Definitely don't see an edge of the earth here either. It is easy to prove that the flat earth myth is wrong. The evidence just simply does not show that the earth is flat, but rather that it is round. Now, most evolutionists that I know of believe the theory of evolution much like those who believe in the flat earth. They've just simply never heard the opposing evidence. In fact, with even a cursory examination, evolution crumbles under the scientific evidence. Yet, like those who believe in the flat earth myth, many want to believe the evolution myth simply because they want it to be true. Our Creator, who visited planet Earth in a specially designed human body, going by the name of Jesus Christ, even responded to the theory of evolution because it was around in his day. Yet, just like in his day, many will choose to believe the evolution myth rather than the truth and the life himself. The one who rose from the dead to prove that he was the truth and the life. Maybe you should get to know the truth and the life today. See you next time.
Of course, the flat earth has absolutely nothing to do with creation-evolution debate. So why did these atheists bring it up? And then vehemently defend it when it was shown to be a lie? Now, while I recognize that not all atheists are like this, in this case it was pretty obvious that, once again, the science and the facts have nothing to do with what they want to believe. The historian Jeffrey Burton Russell, who documented the flat earth myth, could hardly be called a friend of Christians or creationists, but he at least acknowledged the truth. Stick around, we'll be back with the mailbag right after this short break. This show is sponsored in part by Canada's first permanent creation museum in the heart of Alberta's dinosaur beds, the Big Valley Creation Science Museum at bvcsm.com. And by Genesis Park, where you can pre-order your own beautiful hard-covered copy of the Chronicles of Dinosauria, the history and mystery of dinosaurs and man.
What does the Bible say about aliens? Is there life on other planets? What can science tell us about the possibility of aliens? Ian Juby gives answers to these and many more questions in this fascinating and highly disturbing subject. Looking analytically at the subject, complete with the testimonies of people who claim to have been abducted by aliens. The answers will probably surprise you. In this 1.5-hour lecture, Ian shows that the alleged aliens are a problem and that Jesus is the solution. Order online today at Ian's bookstore. Woohoo! Mail for me?
Built Down Superman wrote in talking about fast fossil dinosaur poop called coprolite, which is quite prolific. There's so much of it found on the fossil record that, yes, you can buy some. Now, this should immediately make one realize that fossilization does not take a long time. Now, I usually hand my piece of fossil coprolite around to the children and see if they can guess what it is. Once they find out, many of them are looking to wipe their hands somewhere, even if it is now rock. I wanted to tell you about the time I entered a contest. It was a jewelry contest. I made jewelry out of coprolite. Didn't win, but it came in third. Ha! I'd kill me. YouTuber Answers Questions 1 posted an excellent question with regards to the dinosaur egg nests discussed in our Egg-Splained by the Flood episode. Ian, can't these fossils be explained with local floods? Thanks for writing in. Yes, it is true that the nests certainly could be explained within the context of local floods. However, it is the geology of the layers that the nests, eggs, and even dinosaurs buried alive still sitting on their nests that is revealing. As I mentioned briefly in the program, these layers extend to huge sizes, what are called provincially sized, and often they are at very high elevations too. And those layers are in parallel with other layers, which are also provincial in size. And thus, this was no local flood, but flooding that produced huge provincial-sized tidal flats. YouTuber Spiritus Sancti 777 wrote in, I always look forward to Fridays because of this show. And Complex Adaptive responded with, so do I, but more for the comedic value. For example, quote, cold-blooded mammals, quote, and Juby stating that permafrost thaws in the summer. Too funny. Thanks for writing in, but the cold-blooded mammals was actually a quote from a book. I was well aware that toads and frogs are not mammals, but Williams was not. And as for the permafrost thawing, well, I could have been clearer on my wording. The permafrost rapidly extends down hundreds to thousands of feet in weeks during the winter, and then thaws deep underground. The surface is permafrost, yes, and thus never thaws out. But deep underground, which is what I was talking about, it most certainly does freeze and thaw, and incredibly rapidly at the North Slope. Okay, let's call that a wrap. I'm your host, Ian Juby, signing off for now. Remember, you can send in your comments, questions, feedback, and all your banking information to us in a number of ways. You can email us at comments@genesisweek.com, or you can send us a tweet at genesisweek. Or go to genesisweek.com, which is our YouTube channel, find the most recent show, and leave a comment there. Or leave a comment on our Facebook page. Remember those words of warning from our Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ, who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. We'll see you next week.
We need your support to keep this program on the air. Please pray for us. And if you wish to financially support the program, Canadians can make a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, K2K2P4. While we cannot offer tax-deductible receipts outside of Canada, donors wishing to financially support the program could do so online at ianjuby.org/donations.html. And thank you for your support.